Hey guys, what's up? Different location because right now there's a lot of noise going on downstairs, so I figured I'd just do it up here. Anyway, wanted to get this video out the way. Been meaning to do something somewhat more serious, though I guess some people won't consider it serious because we're talking about martial arts again. Some people would rather the philosophical stuff, but whatever. We'll wax philosophical here anyway. Whatever. Um, I was having a chat with one of my subscribers on Skype, and he brought up an interesting point about martial arts and morality and ethics and such, because he would had you know liked my video on the so-called values and the whole honor and morality in martial arts, and how that doesn't really exist. That's something that was developed later on during peace times, when martial arts was slowly being no longer being as important to a culture as it used to be. And he brought up an interesting point that I wanted to kind of expand upon, about how many of the different morality systems, or ethical systems, or ideas of honor that people tend to believe about martial arts these days weren't necessarily products of the martial arts themselves, but rather was tied more to the culture where it developed in, or even more so to the ideas of the person who happened to have developed the martial art or is teaching the martial art. In other words, you may be following somebody's personal code if you happen to subscribe to certain ideas of honor or ethics, in your particular martial arts you're training in. And that it could have an impact not only on your outlook of how, to look upon life and how to actually apply your art, but it might even impact the techniques themselves. That last part is something that I'm adding in. I thought it was a good point that he rose and brought up, so I figured I'd make a video about it, just to see what you guys would have to say upon seeing it. But the guy has a point. I had mentioned before that if you look at the beginning of fighting skills in different cultures, in the beginning, concepts of honor and morality, they, at least our modern understanding of them, when these supposed ethical systems were codified, these codified systems of behavior didn't really exist until after these arts had already been established and the people practicing them were in a period of relative peace where they sort of had to be controlled. Well, I shouldn't say sort of, they had to be controlled. The samurais, their codified ideas of Bushido, it didn't really get codified until after, the wars had ended. The knights of Europe, their codes of chivalry, when a lot of the warring stuff was dying down, and the lords now had property control and had a whole bunch of freaking warriors under them. They needed to find a way to code of conduct to keep these people in control. You find this all over the place, even in China. You will find different aspects of how one should conduct themselves in society, and these remnants of these codes still are taught today, as if this was always a part of those arts. And sometimes in really funny ways. Like, for instance, I remember one thing, treatise I was reading about Chinese swordsmanship, where they're talking about the way, how a swordsman should conduct themselves. And some of the stuff was pretty, self-explanatory. Be courteous, be peaceful, don't go seeking out violence and fights. Be filial. Respect your family, respect the people. But a couple of things that made me smile was, remember, this is a Chinese martial arts system. Talking about always respect your parents and your ancestors. Well, that's definitely a Chinese cultural thing. Of course, you got to respect your family, but the whole ancestor thing, that's definitely something that kind of hints at Chinese culture. And not necessarily the act of being a good swordsman itself. Another thing that kind of was interesting was be patriotic. I remember reading that in the treatise. Like, don't dishonor your nation as well. you basically you will be there to fight. You be there for your nation, fight for your nation. Be Don't betray the emperor, that sort of thing. And it's like, what does that have to do with being a good swordsman? But that was supposedly part of the system that a Chinese swordsman is supposed to follow. And it was funny to me that this was being pushed now. At the time I had first read it, the 20th century. Now it's the 21st, and I'm pretty sure people would still probably pick this up and read it and think. But again, that morality system had to be tied to that particular culture. What it had to do with the fighting arts itself, very little. Unless you're trying to make sure that the people who study these arts aren't going to be using them against the powers that be. You're learning how to fight and all that. Just don't use any of that to rock the boat. Don't disrupt the status quo. You see that a lot in these morality systems. But what happens when somebody puts their own personal ethics into it and teaches from that standpoint? What are the ramifications of that? Do we have any examples of that? Yes, we do. The guy I was talking to brought up Aikido. And as soon as he brought it up, I went, yeah, you're right. I forgot about that. Because I, right now, cannot bring up the guy's name. It's a Sunday afternoon. I'm feeling lazy. Leave me alone. I'm sorry. Brain is kind of right now. But the guy who founded Aikido, a lot of people seem to, at least people who study Aikido and people who studied his life, they know about this. But a lot of people don't know this. He was trained in more forceful martial arts before he started teaching what he would later be called Aikido. He studied in arts that were, quite frankly, very brutally effective. They had ways of entry. Like he studied jiu-jitsu and other Budo arts, and he, knew how to use them quite well. Very violent arts. Very effective arts. And then because of a change in perspective, because he basically found religion, he started questioning, acting, bringing violent acts upon other people, and that there must, you shouldn't be doing this. We got to be more peaceful people. But he had these fighting skills. What do you do about that? So he changed them and taught a different set of skills, a modified set of skills, altered from what he originally learned and what he knew. What he taught his students ultimately was not the sum total of what he actually knew himself. What he ended up teaching these new students is what we now know as Aikido, which followed his personal ethics about how one conducts themselves in society, which is why Aikido is considered by many to be a more passive art. It's, it's not aggressive. It's usually not an art where people make the first move, which is kind of funny when you look at Steven Seagal movies, but the whole point is an Aikido person is responding to an attack, generally, not initiating one, because that's not being a good person. The founder was, very strict on this, like you don't visit violence upon the other person, and if you have to defend yourself, you end it as non-violently as possible. This opens up a whole lot of discussion that I'm pretty sure some people don't want to get into if they're trying not to make enemies, because if we start dissecting this long enough, it doesn't even have to be that long, sooner or later the topic of effectiveness is going to come in. Because sooner or later you're going to have somebody start talking about, well, if this is all about just standing there waiting for an attack to happen, what about, you're throwing out effective ways of entry, being able to see openings and immediately attacking and exploiting them? What does it say about that? Now, I don't want to go into a whole can of worms about, does that mean that Aikido is not effective? Personally, I think there's some pretty damn good Aikido guys out there that can defend themselves quite well. That's not what I'm trying to bring up here. What I am trying to get people to look at is how these value systems and these ethics, one, how they can come about from either a cultural perspective or somebody's just personal perspective going into the art itself, but it's something that's removed. Well, something that originally wasn't part of whatever fighting arts they knew or what's being taught, but how it can be infused into an art to make something new that wasn't part of the original set of skills that were used to either defend oneself or to bring somebody else down. It created something entirely new. Aikido would be a good example of this. It's somebody's personal ethics getting into fighting arts. And what that means for fighting arts in general, how somebody's personal value systems can change something into something else, and if that impacts it in a positive way or in a negative way, depending on your point of view. I think this would be a fantastic discussion for people who are really interested in the development of fighting arts to kind of delve into, and wondering how much of this might have already been going on in their own art without even realizing it. Could be even going on right now. I've seen examples of, like, the same set of skills being taught in completely different ways because of the perspectives of the person teaching it. You could have one person who they're just about straight up combat effectiveness and just being brutal and getting out there. So he's teaching, the way he teaches his students, it's hard. There's a lot of body conditioning, a lot of sparring, a lot of like go for the throat attitude. And then you go to another place where, the guy's teaching the same set of skills, but he's doing it in a way of, okay, it's just something to do at the end of work or the end of school. The kids coming in, do your punches and stuff. Yeah, you feel good. It builds confidence. Makes you, keeps your health going. Gives you discipline. Different attitude. And that difference in attitude results in a difference in training. And that difference in training could actually end up altering the art a bit. And this is where people start getting into, well, this art is not effective, this art, because of how certain people teach it. And how you're taught, of course, is also going to influence how you might teach it if you decide to pass it on to somebody else. I can even use myself as an example of how my own personal views, kind of dictated my, my own training and my own perspective, which I put in these videos. I got into martial arts pretty much, I think, the same way that so many other people get into it. You see it in the movies. Shaw Brothers ruined my life, man. Anyway, you see it as a kid, all the crazy kung fu stuff. You want to do it too. But that whole coolness factor aspect of it kind of died off of me pretty quick. Like, first you get in there, you see them doing all the spin kicks and all the high moves and, high jumping stuff and crazy swordsmanship, and you want to do it too. But then later on, I start looking at, well, I want to actually know how to use this stuff. I don't just simply want to look cool, I remember, like, even back during my high school days, and that's when I seriously started saying I want to really learn how to use this stuff. The whole debate on what style beats what was going on, like raging like crazy. Of course, what happened in high school, right? What style beats this style beats that style, this is better than that, this style's weak. And already being somebody who was the type of person on the outside looking in, I, was looking at this going, well, all these different fighting arts and fighting skills have something to offer. The question is, how are you training in it and what is your focus? Like, are you actually, are you seriously trying to find a way to make this stuff work? Or are you just simply doing it to be able to do it? I wanted, these are fighting arts, okay? So I wanted to use them to learn how to fight effectively. I wasn't looking into this in order to achieve enlightenment or to get as a form of extra exercise or to get fit or an extra bit of discipline. That stuff will just, it's gonna come with martial arts. It's a physical activity, so of course you're gonna get exercise. It's something that you have to focus in and constantly keep pushing yourself to achieve something. So you're going to get that mental discipline, otherwise you won't exceed at it. The whole enlightenment thing, to be perfectly honest with you, any type of life skill that you throw your life into can give you some form of enlightenment. You see it from philosophers, you see it from doctors, you see it from nurses, you see it from teachers. If they are serious about what they're doing and they use it as their own way of being able to see, it's not just something that they just do, but they also use it as a lens to look upon their own selves as well as to look at society at large, you're going to end up using it to glean more truths, so to speak, about life and everything in it, which is what achieving enlightenment is supposed to be, well, depending on how you use the term. But generally when they say achieving enlightenment, it's to fully get that sudden understanding of what life is all about. Anything can bring you there, really, if you think about it. So the whole thing with me was, my focus is on how to actually fight with this stuff. So all the people that I sought when I was training with people, I ended up wanting to see people who had that same mindset. People who were willing to, I use this stuff to fight. Like the guy who really put my skills together, a dude named Ismail, and I hope to bump into him one day. It's been so long since I've seen Ismail. That guy who I trained with for a while, his focus was straight up martial arts and how to fight effectively with it, period. That guy really helped to form my attitudes on fighting arts today. Like, I was already kind of getting there, but he was the person who really threw out a lot of garbage that I thought about how doing certain techniques and how to move and all that. He's like, no, keep everything tight, keep everything practical, don't waste energy, don't waste time, just hit the dude, stuff like that. He was very practical minded, but he trained in a Chinese martial arts style, which might be shocking to so many of you guys, because these days the attitude is Chinese styles aren't effective. And I've said this many times before, and I'm going to say it again. I don't blame you guys for thinking that, because the way it's being trained in so many places these days, it's not necessarily for effectiveness' sake. It's for different reasons, which goes right back to personal ethics as well as cultural ethics and morality systems, or what your attitudes of honor might be. Because all that, your ideas of what honor is ultimately tie down to your ideas of ethics, whether they're cultural or whether they're personal. And your personal ideas are also going to go into it. Many people these days training in Chinese martial arts and who are teaching them aren't necessarily teaching them from the same standpoint as, say, somebody training in combat sambo or, Krav Maga or, MMA fighting. There's a difference in focus, and whether that happens to be personal ethics or whether it happens to be cultural ones or a mix of the bunch, it's going to affect the art itself and how it's taught, to the point where somebody might just simply transform it into a whole new thing. In fact, a lot of new arts develop not just because of somebody, like after they've learned something, they streamline some stuff, put some new stuff in there and go, hey, look, new fighting art. Sometimes new arts pop up just simply because of a change in perspective. Look at Aikido. It just simply comes from a change in values and a change in what your concepts of honor might be, or your concepts of why to train in a martial art to begin with. And as all these developments happen, then the terms start to change. And while I happen to consider myself something of a purist, and when I feel the term martial art should actually be used the way it was meant, like the word art, don't let the word art fool you. And art is a high developed level of skill. It is not just something that some idiotic self-expression that means nothing. No, if you're saying that something you're practicing is an art, and you're saying that you are an artist in it, you're basically telling me that you've dedicated a whole lot of time and effort into it, you've become an expert at it, you've mastered it, and you're trying to make it your own thing. It's not just, I just self-express myself to it. That has a deeper meaning than but people are using that term and that sentence very loosely, and it gets on my nerves, and I'm going off topic, so sorry about that. The point is, these cultural perspectives and these different attitudes and ethics can change the art or influence it. Sometimes in good ways, sometimes in bad ways. The point of me putting this video up is just to kind of point at that and get some people to start thinking about it if they haven't thought about that before, and see how it might be influencing their own ideas of why it is that they practice what they practice, if indeed you practice this stuff. So, yeah, I don't know if I said a whole lot in this video in terms of actually getting somewhere, but I did want to put this out just for the sake of discussion, in terms of how someone's personal ethics can change things. Like I said, Aikido is one good example of that. I'm trying to think of some other examples of how somebody's ideas of honor or, their own ideas of how to operate in the society, how that can change things. I think one example I can give is probably Tai Chi, because that's something that's, in my opinion, has really freaking changed over the years, depending on cultural attitudes. I don't want to go into the whole long history of how it developed, how it supposedly developed. I will throw all the legend crap out the window about, oh, it started when a Taoist priest saw a crane and a snake. Bullshit. Zhang Sanfeng developed. Bullshit. The evidence is pointing to the fact that they originally developed from a set of military fighting techniques that later on this guy in Chen Village basically, developed fully and taught his family and then taught many people in the village, and it stayed there for a long time before it finally spread out. That's what the evidence seems to suggest. That's what I'm going with. But the point is, it started as straight up fighting techniques. And through the years, many times later on, because of changes in cultural attitudes, it began being seen as a way of self-cultivation, as a way of increasing your longevity, increasing your lifespan, improving your health. And for many people, the fighting aspects just don't enter into it. It's only fairly recently that I've been seeing something of a revival and people going, no, this shit is a martial art. You can fight with this. Yeah, you can. But how are you training in it? Again, if your sets of values and perspectives basically make you treat it as a form of exercise, and that's how you're going to train in it. Combat's going right out the window. You've effectively altered the art. If, on the other hand, you seriously are like, no, this is a fighting art, then there's going to be sparring. There's going to be body conditioning. You're not just simply going to be doing stuff like this. You're going to be doing push-ups. You're going to be conditioning your body. You're going to be performing those forms not just slowly, but quickly. You're going to go through drills. How many Tai Chi people are doing that? Not many. Because of the ethical value system that entered into that particular martial art and the cultural attitudes that entered into that particular martial art. I don't know if that's a really good example, but that's the best one I can think of right now about how, and I know it's a little bit different than concepts of honor, but when you're talking about honor, again, as I said before, you're also talking about ethics and value systems, and they all tie in together. And this is another example of how, because of a change in focus and a change of perspective, the fighting skills have trained in differently to the point where now the way it's practiced, people look at it and go, that ain't effective. In some cases, they're right. I mean, you can't just look at a book, just judge a book by its cover. You see one dude practicing it slowly, but you don't know what the hell he's doing back at home, or how he really trains in it. So you're going to that dude, that ain't effective, and then he throws your ass across the room. You never know. But at the same time, the way people conceive of it, yeah, it probably isn't. Or that's not their focus. Their focus isn't to be a badass fighting machine. Their focus is something completely different. And that focus can come, whether it comes about from a difference in what they believe their art should be, or whether it happens to simply be from a cultural standpoint of what they think a good person is and how they should conduct themselves, is going to affect what they do. And that includes martial arts. So, yeah, long-winded way of just opening this up and saying that it all has to do with perspectives, and hopefully get some decent conversation going on how arts may have been changed over the years through personal perspectives, and how concepts of honor and such could also come from personal perspectives, and how that could change arts and fighting arts and how it can change its development. It's, and how that trickles down to now, our notions of this is what it means to be a martial artist. How do you know? What you think you're being taught may not necessarily be what it originally was. And your concepts of what it means to train in that art, or what it means to be a good martial artist, may actually be coming from somebody's change in perspective down the line. Or maybe even from the perspective of the person teaching you right then and there. You won't really know until you dig a little bit deeper into it. That's it. Catch you guys later.